All right, so here are some tips and tricks in order to try to get better at using Tinkercad and making it more about actually having a vision and knowing what you're doing instead of just plopping stuff onto the work plane. So my first tip is make sure you can visualize what you're trying to make. Have a sketch in your mind or on a piece of paper before you get started. Then look at that sketch and break that down into basic shapes that could be stacked together on top of each other to make that actual object. All right, so let's say I wanted to make a truck. All right, when I visualize a truck, the first thing I see is a long rectangle that makes up most of the body. So let's start with that. All right, if I go over here to the side panel where I have my basic shapes, I can drag and drop a shape down. All right, now first thing I would want everybody to do is I like to work in a unit of measurement that I can understand with like a ruler in the real world. So right now this is all in millimeters. I can tell that because down at the very bottom underneath settings it says 1 millimeter. So this is what you should do. You should go to settings and where it says units, change it to inches and then hit make default and then you can exit out. And now everything you make will be in inches, which is for us in America a slightly easier method to understand. Second thing I would want everybody to do if they want to make something meaningful in Tinkercad is I like to be able to see the measurements of my shapes at all times. So at the top right, there is a ruler tool that I just selected that's highlighted white. If you drag that down onto the grid, I like to put mine off to the corner. Now any shape I have selected will have the 3 different measurements of our X, our Y, and our Z. All right. Now the reason why I like that is because it's more helpful as you go to be able to drag things along. But it also allows me, if I just tap on one of those numbers, to change them to whatever I want. So if I know ahead of time, if I want something to be 5 inches by 2 inches wide by 1 inch tall, I can just type those numbers in and it will automatically just make it happen. All right, so that can make it a lot easier because otherwise when you're changing shapes you have to click on these nodes in the corners and drag and drop, which is doable, but on the iPad it can be frustrating because you can accidentally misclick and end up sliding things or just moving the camera, and that's something I like to avoid. All right, so that's the first thing I would say. Second thing, please know that with every shape you select, there are always options for it. And what I mean by that is right now when I have it selected and you see that blue outline all around it, there is a little tool panel in the top right where it says box. I can click on the red color, and if I wanted to, I could change the color to something else, or I could change it to the shaded color. But the thing I want to show you is neither of those. It's the little caret arrow pointing down next to it. All right. Each shape is going to have its own different things in here. Some of them will have way less options than others. But if you're working with the basic shape of the rectangle, one of the things I love to do is you can add a radius to it, right? So obviously I can add a ton to it, or I can just add a little bit. And if I'm trying to make a truck, I think personally it would look better to not have those hard edges and just have things be rounded over just a little bit. All right, so boom, there's the first part of my truck. The next thing I'd like to do is I would like to put another part where the cab of the truck's going to be on top of this. Now, there's a couple different ways you could go about doing that. The most common way that people would do that would be dragging the red shape down and then positioning the camera. And if you see that little black cone on top, you can click on that carefully because you don't want to miss. Drag it up the right amount, and then you will now have it positioned on top of there. Now, that can be annoying because you have to put your fingers at the right spot and not accidentally go too high or too low. So I like to do it a different way that's a little bit more foolproof. So I'm going to delete that one. And here's how I would go about trying to stack something perfectly on top of something or even on the side of something. All right. Up here in the top right, there is a work plane tool. All right. If you have that selected and then you take your finger and you drag it out, you can see that wherever I slide my finger, it is changing and moving this little orange rectangle wherever I put it. If I want to stack something on top of it, I can let it go at any point on top of here. If I wanted to put it on this side, I'd let it go anywhere here. If I want to put something here, I'd let it go there. So in this case, if I'm doing the cab, I'm going to put it on top. And now you can see, if you look, there is now this orange grid instead of the blue one underneath on top of this. What that does is any new shape that you drag down will now be perfectly placed on top of that object or wherever you left it off. So that can be a lot more beneficial to get things to end up where you want them without the headache of having to drag and drop and slide and accidentally mess up the camera. But if you want it to go back to normal, you don't want to see the orange grid anymore, you're tired of it, you're done stacking things at that height, to get rid of it, click on that same work plane tool in the top right corner, and then click off to the side in just the white area and let go, and everything will go back to normal, right? So in this case, I would want my cab to extend the whole way across, so I could click on the node, all right? And I could try my best to get it to be 2 inches. If it's not automatically snapping to that, you could just type it in. And now I have my 2-inch cab, all right? I could slide it forward or backward a little bit if I want it to look a little bit more like a truck. And just like before, if I wanted to, I could add a little bit of radius to that as well. And in this case, since there's this weird gap in between here, I think I'm gonna slide it down 1 click for myself, all right? And then I'm gonna make it a little taller. So, I'm getting somewhere, all right? I use the work plane tool, I'm using the measurement tools, and I'm starting to get something that looks like it, all right? I'm going to place the green roof tool here, but once again, I'm gonna use the work plane tool, and I'm gonna put it on top of here, so it's kinda at the right spot. And then get rid of the work plane tool. And that is going to be what I think will make the best shaped windshield. But in order to do that, I'm gonna have to rotate this shape. So please look at this closely. When you have an object highlighted, there's gonna be 3 different ways you can rotate it. So right now at the very far point of the top of it, there is a little arc with arrows on the end of it. That will rotate it in those directions. But also look on the far right at the front of the truck, there's also another arrow there that would rotate it that direction. And then if I move the camera a little bit more, it's easier to see now, I also have an arrow behind it that would rotate it another different direction. So make sure you know which way you're trying to rotate it, and then carefully with your finger click on that arrow or that arc with the arrows at the end of it, and then you will be able to rotate it. All right, it puts this circle on the screen with some different angles. But here's a trick with this, all right? If you keep your finger inside the circle, it will allow you to rotate that and kind of snap to some of these common different angles. If I drag my finger outside of that, instead of snapping to those common angles, it'll let me put it at whatever precise amount that you want. So for me, I'm gonna keep it inside just so I don't accidentally rotate it like 1 degree too much, and I'm gonna put it right there at that angle, zoom out a little bit, and once again I'm going to change my measurements a little bit to make it go the whole way across the truck at 2 inches. All right, and because I rotated it, it's no longer sitting flat on the red, so I'm going to use that black cone on top, drag it down a little bit, try to get a good camera angle, make sure I actually went down far enough, plop it into that a little bit. All right, I can click on the white dot at the top, bring this windshield up a little bit taller, and I got myself a basic windshield, even though it's not perfect. All right, now here's the deal. So far, I've had everything be on auto snap to a 1/8 of an inch thing, which has worked really well. It makes things kind of like, as you're dragging things, like pop, pop, pop at these different increments. And sometimes that can be really useful, but other times that might be really annoying and make things move too big or too small, and it won't work out for you. So another tip, down at the bottom, snap grid. If you click on that, you can change it to whatever you want. I like personally to turn it off. And now whenever I move something, all right, there's no longer that snap. It just goes wherever I put it, or in this case, if I ever want to change the size of something and I just don't want it to be quite that tall, I can go down just the right amount that I want, that I think will be good. So just another little tip that can help bring things together, all right? Now, let's add the actual bed of this truck and kind of cut that out. So once again, I'm gonna go and grab the rectangle tool, or at the very top, the very first shape is the exact same shape except it's shaded. All right, now anytime you can turn any of these shapes to shaded by up in the tool panel of that shape from going from the color to the shaded thing. But since I want shaded, I'll just automatically grab that. All right. So in order to make this bed, all right, what I want to do is I'm going to make it about the size of what I think a bed of a truck should look like. So I'm going to slide this forward and backward here with my fingers, slide it a little bit closer to this edge, move the camera so I can get a better view of this one. And to me, that's about the size of what I think a bed of a truck should look like. But when I look at the bottom, I can see that it's going to go the whole way through this. I don't want that. So I could do this two different ways. I could once again keep using that little black cone that's above it to move it, or I haven't really talked about the green measurements. So far we've just talked about these blue measurements that are actual size of the shape itself. But you can see over in the corner there's these two green measurements here. They are how far your thing, your object, is currently from that origin. So there's the two, the X and the Y, but over here, if you look to the far right, there's a little 0. I could also click on that. Oops, I misclicked it. Click on that, and that will allow me to change the height of something as well. So if you ever want to change the location of something and not just drag and slide things, you can type in things. And in this case, I could push this in, and that will pop that up just a little bit as you go. All right, so once you have your shape in there, it's the right size, you got it at the right position, this is what I want it to look like, but it has not actually cut into it yet. In order to cut it into it, here's the trick. You can group shapes together in this app. So for example, if I wanted to combine the bottom of the truck by selecting it, oops, I moved it a little bit, the bottom of the truck and the cab, there is a group button. So at the very top bar, there is on the right side a square and a circle that are overlapping. If I click that with more than one object selected, it will combine them together into a new shape that now, if I were to try to move this, excuse me, I didn't actually group that. If I were to actually group that now, it will now create that as one shape. So you can see here now this is acting as one object. It's all moving at once. All right. So that's what the group tool does. But it even does more than that if you select that with a whole shaded object. All right. Like, which is what I have the bed of the truck right now. Instead of just grouping it together, it will, after it loads for a second, actually cut that shaded shape out and create a whole new shape for us. And now I have the bed of my truck. So that is a super useful tool to create complex shapes here within Tinkercad. All right. So the group tool is super, super powerful. All right. Another tool that is really helpful is if you are ever trying to get something to be like perfectly in the center of something. So let's say I want to perfectly place this windshield. I'm going to make it actually skinnier and make it so that it's perfectly centered in between these. The next tool, and this is a little bit difficult on the iPad, I'm not going to lie, but it is really helpful when you can get it to work, is what you would want to do. If I want to balance this perfectly, I will click on the windshield and the red because I want to balance those two things. And at the very top, next to the group, and then there's right next to group is ungroup with the circle and the square that's overlapping each other. But next to that are two bars, a bigger white one and a shaded darker one. If you click on that, all right, that will produce a bunch of dots around your objects. All right. Now, what you can do with these is you can center things or align things at different ways, whether it's on the X, the Y, or the Z. So in this case, since I want to align it from the front of the car right in the center, excuse me, I'm going to tap that center dot right there. And if I do a quick press, right now I'm holding it in and it's just showing what it's going to do. But if I do a quick press, it will now perfectly center that windshield. So now when I look at it, I can see it's perfectly in the center. And I know because that dot that I just tapped in the center is now grayed out. So that is something that can be a little obnoxious because on the iPad, if I accidentally misclick and I miss the dot, everything will just disappear. And I have to reselect the shapes and reselect at the top the little shaded bars and then do it again. But when you can get it to work, it's great. All right. Getting to the end here, just a couple more things I want you guys to learn. Let's try to add the tires to this, all right? So once again, I'm gonna use the work plane tool, but this time I'm gonna put it on the side of the car, and then I'm gonna use the cylinder tool here, and I'm gonna place it about where I want the tire to go. That's probably a little too far forward, so I'm gonna drag it over a little bit closer to right here. And another thing on the cylinder tool I like to do you see how it's like all segmented on the sides? If I go into the options for that, I can slide the sides up and it makes it way smoother. So you can change with all these things. I really just like to do the sides one. But next thing I'm gonna do, I do not need this to be like a wide body diesel big truck. I'm gonna shrink these tires down, get them about the size of what I think looks good. And then I'm gonna turn off this orange work plane. So go ahead and click on that, click off to the side, and I have myself a tire. You can even come in here, change it, make it look actually more like a tire like that. Once you think you have a good tire, instead of redoing that process 4 times in a row, let me teach you a couple more tricks. So I'm gonna select that tool, and then in the top left, there is a copy and a paste button, and then there's a duplicate and a delete button. I want to teach you guys the duplicate button. So it's the 3 post-it notes stacked on top of each other. If you tap on that, all right, it'll look like nothing happened. But if I zoom in here and I click on the tire, it'll now show that I have a whole new tire here. But I'm not done showing you tricks yet. Down in the bottom left, this only works in the actual app, not on the website version of it. But if you're in the app, there'll be this little button. You can see it's kind of glowing blue here on the screen. If you hold that in with the second finger while you're moving something, it will constrain it to either just travel on the X or the Y axis. So if I don't want to accidentally move the tire too far in, too far down, or up, down, just hold that button in, and then you can have yourself a perfectly aligned tire right there. And then I'm not done yet. Another tip, all right, you can duplicate more than one thing at a time. So let's say I wanted to take both of these tires, I select both of them, I hit duplicate, I can put both of those on the other side of the car. So once again, if I hold in this button down here and I slide these over like this, I can now get the tires perfectly positioned so that they're all evenly spaced and all where they should go so that it's looking good. All right, this would not be helpful for this, but you could also use this tool if you hold it in when you want to resize something. Instead of just resizing everything customizable, it'll make everything get bigger or smaller as you go. All right, so that can also be helpful for something like that as well. All right, so those are just some of the basic things you can do to make life in Tinkercad a lot easier. All right, make sure you're using the camera, rotating, getting to the best position whenever you're resizing things. But those are the tips and tricks that take just doing something basic and making it a lot easier and starting to really bring it to life. All right, good luck.